I found the Dubai boarding passes in my husband's jacket pocket while looking for his car keys. Two first-class tickets to the Burj Al Arab for next weekend, one in his name, Marcus Blackwood, and one for Victoria Sinclair. The problem? I'm Rachel Blackwood, and Victoria is my neighbor's wife. What happened next turned a simple case of adultery into an international scandal that destroyed two marriages and exposed a $1 million fraud scheme.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're a subscriber. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Tell us a duh.
Thursday morning started like any other day in our pristine Westfield suburbs. I was making Marcus his usual black coffee, no sugar, splash of oat milk, exactly the way he'd preferred it for the 12 years we'd been married. The October rain drummed against our kitchen windows, creating that cozy autumn atmosphere that used to make me feel grateful for our comfortable life together. Marcus emerged from his morning shower at exactly 7:15, his salt and pepper hair perfectly styled despite the humidity. At 45, he'd maintained the disciplined appearance that had first attracted me at that consulting conference in Boston 13 years ago. Back then, he'd been a junior analyst at Meridian Financial Group, ambitious and hungry, with dreams of building his own investment firm someday. "Big presentation today," he said, straightening his burgundy tie. "The Townsend Portfolio Review. If we land this account, it could be worth 8 figures annually." Marcus worked in wealth management, helping ultra-high net worth clients navigate complex international investments. His specialty was offshore banking structures and tax optimization strategies, work that required frequent travel and absolute discretion regarding client information. "Will you be home for dinner?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Marcus had been working increasingly late over the past 6 months, citing demanding clients and expansion opportunities. "Probably not until after 9. Townsend wants to discuss some European opportunities." He kissed my forehead with perfunctory affection. "Don't wait up." Victoria Sinclair lived 3 houses down with her husband, Thomas, a cardiologist at Metropolitan General Hospital. They'd moved to our street 2 years ago, and we'd developed polite neighborly relationships. Victoria worked as an interior designer for high-end residential projects, which explained her impeccable taste and constant travel to furniture markets and design shows. She was undeniably stunning, tall and elegant with platinum blonde hair, possessing effortless sophistication that made other women feel inadequate. At 38, she seemed enviably romantic with Thomas, often sharing private jokes that suggested deep intimacy, which made finding those boarding passes devastating. I'd been searching for Marcus's spare car keys because my Honda was in the shop. His navy blazer hung in our front closet, the same jacket he'd worn to last month's company awards dinner, where he'd been recognized for exceptional client satisfaction scores. The Emirates boarding passes fell out like evidence from a crime scene. 2 first-class seats to Dubai International Airport, departing Friday at 6:35 p.m. and returning Tuesday. The reservation showed a junior suite at the Burj Al Arab, the 7-star hotel that Marcus had always claimed was a overpriced tourist trap whenever I'd suggested we visit Dubai ourselves. Marcus Blackwood and Victoria Sinclair. The names were printed in bold letters that seemed to mock my shock. Below their names, the booking reference indicated the reservation had been made 6 weeks ago, charged to a credit card I didn't recognize. My hands trembled as I studied every detail, searching for some innocent explanation. Business travel, perhaps? But the hotel reservation destroyed any possibility of innocent interpretation. The Burj Al Arab didn't host business conferences. It was a destination for romantic luxury, the kind of place couples went to celebrate anniversaries or honeymoons. I sank onto our living room sofa, still clutching the boarding passes, as the magnitude of betrayal began to crystallize. Not only was Marcus having an affair, but he was conducting it with surgical precision and apparent indifference to the collateral damage it would cause. Victoria's husband Thomas would be devastated. The financial implications struck me next. First-class tickets to Dubai cost at least $8,000 each. The Burj Al Arab commanded $5,000 per night for junior suites. This wasn't spontaneous romance. It was calculated investment in an affair that suggested serious emotional and financial commitment. Where was this money coming from? Our joint accounts showed healthy balances, but nothing that would support this extravagant spending without my notice. Marcus managed our investments and handled most financial planning, claiming his professional expertise made him better suited for complex money management. I trusted his judgment completely. Now I wondered what else I'd failed to notice while trusting blindly. My phone buzzed with a text from Victoria herself, sent to our neighborhood group chat. Can't wait for this weekend. Thomas is taking me somewhere special for our anniversary. He won't tell me where, but I suspect it involves room service and no schedule. The casual deception in her message made my stomach churn. While she was publicly celebrating her marriage to Thomas, she was privately planning to spend the weekend in Dubai with my husband. The level of compartmentalization required for such systematic lying suggested this affair had been developing for months. The sound of our doorbell shattered my spiraling thoughts. Through the peephole, I could see Thomas Sinclair standing on our front porch, looking unusually agitated for someone known for his calm bedside manner. His usually perfect posture seemed strained, and he kept checking his phone with obvious anxiety. I opened the door with the boarding passes still clutched in my trembling hand, trying to compose my expression into something resembling normalcy. Thomas stood before me in his navy scrubs, his thick brown hair disheveled as if he'd been running his fingers through it repeatedly. Dark circles under his hazel eyes suggested he hadn't been sleeping well. "Rachel, I'm sorry to bother you so early," he began, his voice carrying unusual tension. "I was wondering if you've noticed anything unusual about Victoria lately." The question hit me like a physical blow. Here was confirmation that I wasn't imagining things, that the evidence in my hands represented a reality affecting both our households. Thomas had clearly been wrestling with suspicions of his own, probably for weeks or months. "Unusual how?" I managed, stepping aside to let him into our foyer. Thomas hesitated, struggling with how much to reveal. "She's been traveling more frequently for work, design consultations requiring overnight stays in the city. Last week, she claimed she had a client emergency that kept her out until 3 a.m., but when I called her office the next day, they said she hadn't been in at all." I led him to our kitchen, my mind racing. Victoria's interior design business provided perfect cover for an affair, offering flexible schedules and legitimate reasons for absences. But Thomas was meticulous, the kind of surgeon who noticed details and patterns. If he was asking these questions, he'd been collecting evidence. "Coffee?" I offered, needing time to decide how much to share. "Please." Thomas sat heavily at our breakfast nook, the same spot where Marcus had eaten toast just an hour earlier while discussing his fictional presentation. "Rachel, I found something yesterday that I can't explain. Credit card charges for restaurants I've never been to, hotel charges in the city on nights when Victoria claimed she was working late from home." My heart hammered as I poured his coffee. The financial discrepancies Thomas was describing mirrored my own concerns about Marcus's mysterious funding for luxury Dubai accommodations. Whatever was happening between our spouses involved serious money and careful planning. "How long has this been going on?" I asked, setting his mug down with hands I hoped appeared steadier than they felt. The strange behavior? Maybe 6 months. But the financial irregularities go back further. Thomas pulled out his phone and showed me a screenshot of credit card statements. "Look at this charge from August. Meridian Restaurant on 5th Street, $300 for dinner." I was working a double shift that night, and Victoria said she was home with a migraine. Meridian Restaurant. I knew that name because Marcus had mentioned taking a potential client there for a business dinner in August. He'd come home late that night, claiming the client had been impressed with their investment strategies. I'd been pleased that Marcus was attracting such high-value prospects. Now I realized my husband had been using our marriage as cover for his affair, just as Victoria had been hers. "Thomas," I said carefully, "I need to show you something." I placed the boarding passes on our kitchen table between us. Thomas stared at them for a long moment, his face cycling through confusion, recognition, and finally devastation. As a surgeon, he was accustomed to delivering difficult news to families, but receiving it seemed to hit him with unexpected force. Dubai, he whispered, picking up the passes with the same reverent care he might use handling a patient's x-rays.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
She told me she was going to a design conference in Chicago this weekend, said it was mandatory for maintaining her certification. The elaborate nature of their deception was becoming clearer. This wasn't spontaneous affair driven by passion. Victoria and Marcus had constructed intricate false narratives to explain their absences, complete with fictional business obligations and fabricated professional requirements. The level of planning suggested they'd been coordinating these lies for months. "There's more," Thomas said, his voice hollow. "I hired a private investigator last month. I felt guilty about it, like I was violating her privacy, but the inconsistencies in her stories were driving me crazy." He showed me his phone again, displaying photographs that made my coffee taste like acid. Marcus and Victoria entering a downtown hotel together, Marcus helping Victoria into his Mercedes, Victoria laughing at something Marcus had whispered in her ear, her hand resting intimately on his chest. The investigator followed them last Tuesday. They spent 3 hours at the Riverside Hotel, then had dinner at that steakhouse Victoria always claimed was too expensive for us to try. Thomas's clinical precision in recounting the facts couldn't mask the pain in his voice. In the images, Marcus appeared more animated and relaxed than I'd seen him in years. His smile looked genuine, in a way that made me question whether he'd ever looked at me with such obvious joy. Victoria radiated the same happiness, her posture suggesting she was exactly where she wanted to be. "How long have you suspected?" Thomas asked, noticing my lack of surprise at the photographic evidence. "About 30 minutes, I admitted. I found these boarding passes when I was looking for spare car keys. Before that, I had no idea anything was wrong." We spent the next hour sharing information and developing a strategy. Thomas would continue monitoring Victoria's financial activities while maintaining his normal routine. I would search for additional evidence in Marcus's home office and personal belongings. We exchanged contact information and agreed to meet again the following day to compare findings. "Rachel, I want you to know that whatever we discover, whatever they've done, you're not alone in this," Thomas said as he prepared to leave. "We'll figure out how to protect ourselves." His words carried professional authority and personal conviction. After years of marriage to someone who'd been systematically deceiving me, having an ally who understood our situation felt like the first positive development since I'd found those boarding passes. The rest of Thursday passed in a surreal haze of forced normalcy. I completed my client work with mechanical precision, designing marketing materials for a boutique hotel chain, while my mind replayed every interaction I'd had with Marcus over the past 6 months. Each memory now carried potential for hidden meaning, each casual comment a possible clue to his deception. When Marcus returned home at 9:30 p.m., I was waiting in our living room with wine and what I hoped appeared to be casual interest in his day. He looked energized, despite claiming exhaustion, his eyes bright with anticipation I hadn't seen in years. "How did the Townsend presentation go?" I asked, studying his face for tells I'd never thought to look for before. "Better than expected," Marcus replied, loosening his burgundy tie with obvious satisfaction. "They're interested in exploring some international opportunities, emerging markets, diversified portfolios, the kind of sophisticated investments that require careful handling." The phrase international opportunities took on sinister significance now that I knew about his Dubai plans. Marcus had always been skilled at embedding truth within lies, using his legitimate work as cover for personal activities. His mention of emerging markets could easily describe romantic investments in his relationship with Victoria. "That sounds promising," I managed. "Will it require much travel?" Marcus paused in unbuttoning his shirt, and for a moment I thought I'd detected something shifty in his expression. But he recovered quickly, offering the practiced smile he used during client presentations. "Possibly. International finance requires face-to-face relationship building. You understand how these things work."
He kissed the top of my head before heading upstairs. I might need to take some trips over the next few months to establish trust with overseas contacts. I remained downstairs after Marcus went to bed, using the quiet hours to examine our shared life with new scrutiny. Our photo albums told a story I'd believed was genuine, but now seemed scripted. Recent pictures showed Marcus's smiles becoming increasingly perfunctory, his body language suggesting he was physically present but emotionally elsewhere.
The timeline was telling. Our last genuinely happy photograph together had been taken in March during our weekend trip to Napa Valley. Marcus had surprised me with the getaway for my 39th birthday, claiming he wanted to reconnect after a stressful quarter at work. Looking at those images now, I realized it had been his farewell tour rather than romantic reconciliation. By April, his behavior had shifted subtly. Longer hours at the office, increased attention to his appearance, and new interest in fitness that he attributed to maintaining health as he approached 50. The gym membership he'd purchased in May suddenly seemed less about personal wellness and more about impressing someone specific. Victoria had moved to our neighborhood in February. The timing couldn't be coincidental. I spent Friday morning conducting reconnaissance that would have impressed Thomas' private investigator. While Marcus attended his morning meetings, I drove through our neighborhood with purpose, observing details I'd previously overlooked through complacent routine. Victoria's house showed signs of unusual activity. A landscaping crew was installing new outdoor lighting, expensive fixtures that seemed designed for evening entertainment. Through her kitchen window, I could see fresh flowers arranged with professional precision and champagne glasses drying on her counter. Someone was preparing for a celebration. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, client lunch running long. Won't be home until after 6. Order dinner for yourself. The casual dismissal stung more than usual because I now understood its true meaning. Marcus wasn't attending a client lunch, he was probably with Victoria, making final arrangements for their Dubai adventure. The ease with which he lied to me suggested this deception had become second nature. I used his absence to search our home office with systematic thoroughness. Marcus's desk had always been off-limits, supposedly containing confidential client information that required protection. Now I understood that his insistence on privacy had more personal motivations. His computer was password protected, but Marcus had always been predictable with security measures. I tried our anniversary date, my birthday, his mother's maiden name, finally succeeding with Meridian 2023. A combination revealing his lack of creativity in concealing activities. The browser history painted a devastating picture. Hotel websites for luxury Dubai accommodations, flight comparison sites, and travel forums discussing romantic destinations. But more disturbing were the financial websites Marcus had been accessing. Offshore banking portals, cryptocurrency exchange platforms, and investment management systems I didn't recognize. The email folders contained correspondence that made my stomach clench. Messages from Cayman Islands banking institutions, confirmations of wire transfers to accounts bearing unfamiliar numbers, and investment statements showing assets I'd never heard Marcus mention. One email thread caught my attention because it included Victoria's name. The messages discussed portfolio diversification strategies and asset protection measures in language that seemed deliberately obscure. But the underlying message was clear. Marcus and Victoria weren't just having an affair, they were moving money through systems designed to hide financial activity. A particularly damning email from 3 weeks ago referenced their upcoming business trip and the need to finalize international arrangements before the November deadline. The November deadline was next week, which suggested their Dubai trip wasn't purely romantic. They were planning something that required international financial coordination. I screenshot everything with trembling fingers, uploading the evidence to a secure cloud account that Marcus couldn't access. If Thomas was right about needing complete information before making decisions, I was building a dossier that revealed systematic financial deception alongside the emotional betrayal. The sound of the garage door opening sent me scrambling to close Marcus's computer and return to my normal afternoon routine. He entered through our kitchen door at 6:45, carrying flowers and wearing the satisfied expression of someone whose plans were proceeding smoothly. "How was your day, beautiful?" he asked, presenting me with white roses that seemed like a guilty conscience's peace offering. "Quiet," I replied, accepting the flowers while analyzing his demeanor for signs of nervousness. "These are lovely. What's the occasion? Can't a husband buy flowers for his wife without needing a special reason?" Marcus's tone carried manufactured spontaneity, the kind of forced casualness that trial lawyers used when introducing evidence they wanted to seem unimportant. That evening, I received a text from Thomas, "Found something important. Can you meet tomorrow morning? Victoria's leaving early for her conference." Marcus was in our master bathroom, singing in the shower with enthusiasm I hadn't heard in months. The man preparing for his romantic Dubai escape with someone else's wife was happier than he'd been during any recent evening at home with me. I replied to Thomas, 9 a.m. at Riverside Park. "What did you find?" His response arrived within minutes. "Evidence they're planning more than just adultery. We need to talk." Saturday morning arrived with deceptive tranquility. Marcus left at 7 a.m. for his alleged golf game with Henderson, kissing my cheek with the same casual affection he'd displayed throughout our marriage. His golf bag sat prominently by the garage door, a prop in his elaborate performance of normalcy. I waited until his Mercedes disappeared around the corner before driving to Riverside Park. The October air carried the crisp promise of winter-autumn leaves crunching under my feet as I walked toward the pavilion where Thomas waited with 2 coffee cups and an expression that suggested our conversation would be anything but pleasant. "Thank you for meeting me," Thomas said, handing me a steaming cup. His usual composed demeanor had been replaced by focused intensity he probably displayed in surgical suites when facing life-threatening complications. "What did you find?" I asked, settling onto the park bench beside him. Thomas opened a manila folder with methodical precision. "Victoria's been living a double life for longer than either of us realized. The affair with Marcus is just the latest chapter in a pattern that goes back years." He showed me a private investigator's report containing photographs and documentation spanning 18 months. Victoria meeting various men at expensive restaurants, entering hotels during business hours, traveling to cities where she claimed to have design consultations but where no clients could be verified. "She's done this before," Thomas continued, his voice carrying clinical detachment he used when delivering difficult diagnoses. "The investigator tracked down 3 other men she's been involved with over the past 2 years. All married, all in finance or investment management, all with access to significant assets. The pattern was chilling in its systematic nature. Victoria wasn't having affairs driven by passion or emotional connection. She was conducting a predatory campaign against wealthy married men, using her beauty and sophistication as weapons in what appeared to be an elaborate financial scheme. "Look at this," Thomas said, pointing to a photograph that made my blood run cold. Victoria and Marcus weren't alone in the image. They were seated at a restaurant table with 2 other couples I didn't recognize, all raising champagne glasses in what appeared to be a celebration. I had the investigator identify the other people. The blonde woman is Helena Cromwell, married to Jonathan Cromwell. He runs a hedge fund specializing in international investments. The couple across from them are Patricia and William Chen. He's a tax attorney who specializes in offshore asset protection. The implications were staggering. Marcus and Victoria weren't conducting a simple affair, they were part of a network that included other couples with expertise in moving and hiding money. The dinner celebration suggested they were coordinating activities that went far beyond romantic deception. "There's more," Thomas said, producing bank statements that made my hands shake. "Victoria's been systematically emptying our joint accounts, transferring funds to investments I've never heard of. She's stolen nearly $400,000 from our savings, retirement accounts, even the emergency fund we established after my father's heart attack. The financial devastation was comprehensive and ruthless. Victoria had been stripping their marriage of assets while maintaining the facade of loving wife, ensuring Thomas would be left financially destroyed when their relationship inevitably collapsed. "How long has she been stealing from you?" I asked, though I suspected the answer would parallel my own discoveries about Marcus. The transfers began 8 months ago, right around the time she started working with her new business partner on high-end residential projects. Thomas's tone made it clear he now understood Victoria's business partnership was entirely fictional. "She's been forging my signature on documents, using my medical credentials to establish credibility with financial institutions, even taking out loans against our house without my knowledge." I shared my own findings from Marcus's computer, showing Thomas the offshore accounts, cryptocurrency transfers, and communications with Caribbean banking institutions. As we compared evidence, a horrifying picture emerged of systematic financial fraud conducted by people we trusted completely.
They're not just stealing from us, I realized aloud. They're using our identities and reputations to legitimize their criminal activities. Marcus's clients probably think I'm aware of his investment strategies. Your patients probably assume you approve of Victoria's financial decisions. Thomas nodded grimly. We've been unknowing accomplices in our own destruction. While we thought we were building marriages, they were building criminal enterprises, using our names and credibility as cover. The scope of betrayal went far beyond infidelity. Marcus and Victoria had been systematically destroying our financial security while positioning us to take blame for their crimes. When their scheme inevitably collapsed, Thomas and I would face not only personal devastation, but potential legal liability for activities we'd never authorized. I found something else, Thomas said, producing a printed email that made my stomach churn. Victoria's been corresponding with someone in Dubai about finalizing arrangements for permanent relocation. This isn't a romantic weekend, Rachel. They're planning to disappear. The email chain detailed logistics for transferring large sums of money to United Arab Emirates banking institutions, establishing residency in a country with limited extradition agreements, and liquidating assets in ways that would be difficult to trace. Marcus and Victoria weren't planning a vacation. They were orchestrating their escape from prosecution. "We have 48 hours, Thomas said, checking his phone. Their flight leaves Monday evening. Once they're in Dubai with those offshore accounts activated, we'll never recover our money or see them face justice." The timeline created urgency that transformed my shock into focused determination. We couldn't prevent the emotional damage they'd already inflicted, but we might still protect ourselves from complete financial ruin and ensure they faced consequences for their crimes. "What do you propose we do?" I asked, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. Thomas smiled for the first time since we'd begun sharing evidence, and I recognized the expression surgeons wore when they'd identified the source of a problem and knew exactly how to fix it. "We're going to Dubai," he said, "but we're not going to surprise them with tears and accusations. We're going with federal agents, frozen bank accounts, and enough evidence to ensure they spend the next 20 years in prison." By Sunday morning, Thomas and I had transformed from devastated spouses into amateur detectives with professional support. Agent Sarah Martinez from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division had agreed to an emergency weekend meeting after reviewing our initial evidence package. Her willingness to interrupt her personal time confirmed what we'd suspected. Marcus and Victoria were part of something much larger than simple embezzlement. "What you've uncovered appears to be a sophisticated marriage fraud operation," Agent Martinez explained as we sat in her downtown office. At 42, she possessed the kind of sharp intelligence that had probably made her formidable in interrogation rooms. "We've been tracking similar schemes in other cities, but this is the first time we've had inside access to the perpetrator's planning." She spread out evidence across her conference table like pieces of a complex puzzle. Bank statements, travel itineraries, investment records, and surveillance photographs created a timeline that revealed systematic criminal activity spanning multiple states and international jurisdictions. "Your husband and his associate have been operating what we call a honey trap network," Agent Martinez continued. Attractive individuals target wealthy married victims, establish romantic relationships, then use those connections to gain access to assets and confidential financial information. The clinical description of our marriages as criminal enterprises was devastating, but oddly liberating. Understanding that we'd been targeted by professional predators somehow made our naive trust seem less pathetic and more understandable. The Dubai component is particularly concerning, noted, highlighting Marcus and Victoria's travel plans. The United Arab Emirates has become a preferred destination for financial criminals because their banking privacy laws make asset recovery extremely difficult once funds are transferred to local institutions. Thomas leaned forward with focused intensity. What kind of timeline are we looking at for intervention? Their flight leaves tomorrow evening. That's actually advantageous, Agent Martinez replied. International flights provide opportunities for arrest that don't exist once suspects reach their destination. However, we need additional evidence to establish probable cause for charges that will hold up in federal court.
She outlined what seemed like an impossible task. Within 24 hours, we needed to document ongoing criminal activity, establish the scope of the financial fraud, and provide evidence that would justify arresting American citizens on international flights. I volunteered to return home and monitor Marcus's computer activity using software Agent Martinez provided to track real-time financial transactions. Thomas would maintain surveillance on Victoria while coordinating with federal agents who were already positioning themselves for potential arrests. The software installation required accessing Marcus's computer while he remained unaware of federal involvement. I returned home to find him in our kitchen, cheerfully preparing what appeared to be a farewell brunch. His mood seemed unusually elevated, even for someone anticipating a romantic weekend. "You seem happy," I observed, watching him whisk eggs with unusual enthusiasm. "Just looking forward to some relaxation," Marcus replied, his tone carrying forced casualness that I now recognized as a warning sign. Henderson and I decided to extend our golf weekend into a guy's trip. Spontaneous adventure, you know how it is. The lie about extending his fictional golf trip with Henderson was apparently his cover story for the Dubai departure. Marcus had always been methodical about creating alibis that could withstand casual scrutiny, but his current deception showed signs of rushed planning and overconfidence. I excused myself to use our home office, claiming I needed to complete urgent client work. The federal software installed quickly and immediately began monitoring Marcus's computer activity. Within minutes, I was watching real-time evidence of massive financial fraud unfold on my laptop screen. Marcus was systematically liquidating client investment accounts, transferring millions of dollars through shell companies to offshore banking institutions. The amounts were staggering, far beyond what Thomas and I had initially discovered. His client list included some of the city's wealthiest families, people who trusted Marcus with their retirement savings and children's college funds. Each transaction was meticulously planned to avoid triggering automatic fraud detection systems. Amounts were kept below federal reporting requirements, transfers were spread across multiple institutions, and timing was coordinated to maximize confusion when the thefts were eventually discovered. My phone buzzed with a text from Agent Martinez. "Are you seeing this activity?" I confirmed that Marcus was actively moving money while typing my response. Within the past hour, he'd transferred over $2 million to accounts that traced back to Dubai banking institutions. The scope of his theft was breathtaking and would financially destroy dozens of families who trusted him with their life savings. Agent Martinez's response was immediate. "We have probable cause. Maintain surveillance and document everything. Federal warrants are being prepared." By evening, federal agents had identified the full scope of the criminal network. Helena and Jonathan Cromwell were already in custody, arrested at LAX while attempting to board a flight to Switzerland. Patricia and William Chen had been detained at their law office, caught in the act of shredding documents related to offshore shell companies. "The network is collapsing," Agent Martinez informed us during an evening briefing. Your evidence provided the breakthrough we needed to move against all participants. Marcus and Victoria are the final pieces. That night, I lay in bed beside Marcus as he slept peacefully, completely unaware that federal agents were preparing to end his criminal career permanently. His breathing was steady and relaxed, the sleep of someone who believed his elaborate deceptions had succeeded perfectly. In less than 18 hours, Marcus would board a flight to Dubai, expecting to begin a new life funded by stolen millions. Instead, he'd be arrested for financial crimes that carried decades in federal prison. Monday morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. Marcus left our house at his usual time, carrying the same leather briefcase he'd used throughout our marriage, now knowing it contained documents that would soon become evidence in a federal prosecution. His kiss goodbye lasted slightly longer than usual, and I wondered if some part of him suspected this was our final domestic interaction. "I'll call you when I land," he said, maintaining his fiction about the Henderson Gulf trip even in what he believed were his last moments as my husband. "Love you." The words felt like artifacts from a relationship that had never really existed. Marcus had been performing the role of loving husband while systematically dismantling everything that performance was supposed to protect.
Agent Martinez called 30 minutes after Marcus left. "We've confirmed Victoria is following the same timeline. Both subjects are proceeding to the airport as scheduled. Federal teams are positioned at every checkpoint between here and Dubai." Thomas met me at the FBI field office downtown, his face carrying the grim satisfaction of a surgeon who'd successfully identified a malignant tumor. We'd transformed from victims into active participants in federal law enforcement, our personal devastation becoming the foundation for a criminal case that would protect countless future victims. "The Financial Crimes Unit has been monitoring their accounts since yesterday," Agent Martinez explained, showing us real-time tracking displays that looked like something from a spy thriller. "They've moved over $8 million through various shell companies in the past 48 hours. The money trail leads directly to Dubai banking institutions that specialize in wealth management for expatriate criminals." The scope of their theft was staggering. Marcus and Victoria hadn't just been stealing from their spouses, they'd been operating a criminal enterprise that targeted dozens of wealthy families across multiple states. Their victim list included business owners, retired executives, and professional couples who'd trusted them with life savings. "What happens when they reach the airport?" Thomas asked, his medical training making him focus on procedural details and potential complications. "They'll be arrested during the boarding process," Agent Martinez replied. "We want them to believe they're escaping successfully right up until federal agents place them in custody. The psychological impact of having their freedom snatched away at the moment they thought they'd achieved it sends a powerful message to other criminals operating similar schemes." I felt a complex mixture of anticipation and dread. Part of me desperately wanted Marcus to face justice for the systematic way he'd destroyed our marriage and stolen from innocent people. But another part of me was terrified of witnessing the complete collapse of someone I'd loved for 12 years, even if that love had been built on lies. Thomas and I drove to the airport in his Tesla, both of us processing the surreal nature of our situation. 48 hours ago, we'd been unsuspecting spouses worried about routine marital problems. Now we were key witnesses in a federal criminal investigation that would dominate local news coverage for months. Through the terminal windows, I could see Marcus and Victoria walking together with the casual intimacy of a couple beginning a romantic getaway. Marcus was wearing the navy suit I'd helped him select for client presentations, while Victoria looked elegant in designer clothing that had probably been purchased with stolen money. They moved through the airport with practiced ease, suggesting they'd rehearsed international travel procedures during previous criminal escapes. Their body language showed no signs of nervousness or concern about potential surveillance. "They're approaching the gate," Agent Martinez reported. "Boarding begins in 10 minutes." The first-class boarding announcement echoed through the terminal. Marcus and Victoria approached the gate agent with their forged documents and stolen money tickets, completely unaware that federal agents were closing in from multiple directions. "This is it," Agent Martinez said through our earpieces. "All units execute arrests now." What happened next unfolded like a carefully choreographed performance. FBI agents appeared from behind support pillars, emerged from security checkpoints, and materialized from positions throughout the boarding area. Marcus and Victoria found themselves surrounded by law enforcement officers who'd been tracking their movements for hours. The shock on their faces was absolute and devastating. Marcus's confident expression crumbled into confusion, then recognition, then desperate calculation as he realized his escape plan had been compromised. Victoria's elegant composure shattered completely, her sophisticated facade replaced by panic that revealed her true character. Marcus Blackwood and Victoria Sinclair, you're under arrest for wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes, Agent Martinez announced, her voice carrying the authority of federal law enforcement. Through the terminal windows, Thomas and I watched the arrests unfold with a mixture of satisfaction and profound sadness. Justice was being served, but the cost of achieving it had been the complete destruction of 2 marriages and the trust that had taken years to build. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit worked through the night following the arrests, building a prosecutorial case that would ensure Marcus and Victoria faced maximum penalties for their systematic theft. Agent Martinez called Tuesday morning with updates that revealed the true scope of their criminal enterprise. The forensic accountants have identified over $40 million in stolen assets, she reported during our debriefing at the federal building. Your husband and his associate weren't just operating locally, they've been running similar schemes in Chicago, Atlanta, and Phoenix. The victim count is approaching 300 families. Thomas and I sat in the sterile conference room, processing numbers that seemed impossible to comprehend. Marcus had stolen enough money to fund small municipalities, destroying hundreds of lives while maintaining the facade of respectable financial advisor. The systematic nature of his crimes suggested sociopathic planning that spanned years of careful preparation. The digital evidence recovered from their devices is particularly damning, Agent Martinez continued, spreading printed documents across the conference table. They maintained detailed victim profiles, psychological assessments, and strategic timelines for financial exploitation. The documents revealed Marcus and Victoria's clinical approach to emotional manipulation. They'd studied their targets with scientific precision, identifying psychological vulnerabilities that could be exploited for financial access. My profile described me as trusting spouse with inherited assets, minimal financial sophistication, strong emotional attachment to marriage stability. Reading their assessment of my character felt like being dissected by predators who'd viewed me as prey rather than a human being deserving of respect. Every conversation we'd shared, every intimate moment we'd experienced, had been contaminated by Marcus's systematic evaluation of my weaknesses and blind spots. Thomas's profile was equally devastating. High-earning medical professional with limited time for financial oversight, traditional values regarding spousal trust, significant retirement savings vulnerable to gradual drainage. They've been planning these thefts for over 3 years, Agent Martinez explained. The Dubai operation was their exit strategy, designed to coincide with maximum asset accumulation and minimal chance of discovery before escape. The evidence revealed sophisticated coordination between Marcus and Victoria that went far beyond romantic partnership. They'd operated like a criminal corporation with defined roles, strategic planning, and systematic execution of financial fraud. Their affair had been a business arrangement disguised as passion. The most disturbing discovery involves their future victim list, Agent Martinez said, producing a document that made my stomach clench. They'd already identified targets in Dubai, wealthy expat couples who would have been perfect marks for their next phase of operations. Marcus and Victoria hadn't been planning to retire on their stolen millions. They'd been preparing to expand their criminal enterprise internationally, using Dubai's financial privacy laws to establish a base for global fraud operations. What kind of sentences are we looking at? Thomas asked, his medical training making him focus on prognosis and treatment outcomes. Federal guidelines suggest 25 to 30 years for the financial crimes alone, Agent Martinez replied. The conspiracy charges and interstate commerce violations could add another decade. They're looking at effective life sentences. The prosecution's case was strengthened by evidence from other network members who'd been arrested simultaneously. Helena and Jonathan Cromwell had provided testimony about the systematic nature of their criminal operations in exchange for reduced sentences. Patricia and William Chen's law office had yielded documents showing how they'd helped launder stolen assets through offshore shell companies. "There's something else you need to know," Agent Martinez said, her tone shifting to something more personal. "The asset recovery process will take months, possibly years. The money they stole has been moved through multiple shell companies and offshore accounts. You'll eventually recover most of your losses, but the timeline is uncertain." The financial recovery aspect hadn't been our primary concern during the investigation, but the practical implications were becoming clear. Thomas and I would need to rebuild our lives while waiting for complex legal processes to restore what had been stolen from us. Agent Martinez handed us business cards for victim services coordinators and financial counselors who specialized in fraud recovery. The federal government has resources to help victims rebuild after this kind of systematic theft. You won't have to navigate the recovery process alone. The offer of support was welcome, but it highlighted how dramatically our lives had been altered by people we'd trusted completely. We'd gone from successful professionals with stable marriages to federal crime victims requiring government assistance to rebuild our basic financial security.
"When will they be formally charged?" I asked, needing to understand the timeline for legal proceedings that would dominate our lives for the foreseeable future. Federal arraignment is scheduled for Thursday. They'll be formally charged with wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, and violations of interstate commerce laws. Bail will be denied due to flight risk and the international scope of their crimes. The legal machinery was moving with efficiency that suggested federal prosecutors were confident in their case. Marcus and Victoria would remain in custody throughout the trial process, ensuring they couldn't flee or destroy additional evidence. That night, I sat in our empty house, surrounded by evidence tags and federal seizure notices, trying to imagine a future that didn't include the man who'd shared my bed while planning my destruction. The silence felt profound after years of living with someone whose every word had been calculated deception. Wednesday morning brought devastating news that transformed our local criminal case into something with international implications. Agent Martinez called at 6 a.m. with updates that would reshape the entire investigation. "We've identified connections to criminal networks in 7 countries," she announced during an emergency briefing at the federal building. Marcus and Victoria weren't operating independently. They're part of a sophisticated international fraud syndicate that's been operating for over a decade. Thomas and I sat in the same conference room where we'd learned about their domestic crimes, now processing evidence that suggested we'd uncovered something far more sinister than marriage fraud. The documents included correspondence with criminal organizations in Switzerland, Singapore, Monaco, and the Cayman Islands. The Dubai operation was a small component of their larger criminal enterprise. They've been funneling stolen assets to a Swiss-based organization that specializes in laundering money for international white-collar criminals. The amounts involved exceed $200 million. The scope was staggering and terrifying. Marcus hadn't been a successful financial advisor who'd gradually descended into criminal behavior. He'd been a career criminal who'd used legitimate employment as cover for systematic theft that spanned continents and involved sophisticated criminal networks. "This explains how they were able to move money so efficiently," Agent Martinez said, highlighting banking records that showed transfers through multiple countries within hours. They had established relationships with criminal financial institutions that specialize in rapid asset laundering and identity protection. The evidence revealed Marcus and Victoria's true sophistication. They'd operated like international spies, maintaining false identities in multiple countries, establishing backup financial accounts under assumed names, and coordinating with criminal organizations that provided services ranging from document forgery to assassination if witnesses became problematic. The most disturbing discovery involves their long-term planning, Agent Martinez said, producing surveillance photographs that made my blood run cold. They've been documenting our investigation since we began building the case. They knew federal agents were closing in. The photographs showed Thomas and I meeting in Riverside Park, entering the FBI building, and coordinating with federal agents during the airport arrest operation. Marcus and Victoria's criminal associates had been monitoring our activities while we thought we were conducting a secret investigation. "How is that possible?" Thomas asked, his medical training making him focus on diagnostic accuracy. Professional criminal networks have resources that rival government intelligence services. They employ former CIA operatives, retired federal agents, and sophisticated surveillance technology. Once you became active witnesses, you became targets for elimination. The revelation that we'd been under criminal surveillance while building our case created a level of danger we'd never anticipated. Thomas and I thought we were pursuing justice against local criminals. Instead, we'd declared war against international criminal organizations that viewed witness elimination as routine business practice. The good news is that their surveillance also provided evidence of criminal conspiracy and witness intimidation, Agent Martinez continued, showing us intercepts of communications between Marcus and Victoria's criminal associates discussing witness management and problem resolution. The clinical language barely disguised discussions about whether Thomas and I should be murdered to prevent our testimony from reaching federal prosecutors.
Marcus specifically advocated for our elimination, Agent Martinez said, highlighting transcripts that made me physically ill. He argued that killing you both would be more efficient than attempting to discredit your testimony through legal channels. Reading Marcus's casual discussion of my murder was more devastating than discovering his financial crimes. The man who'd shared my bed for 12 years had been prepared to have me killed to protect his criminal enterprise. Victoria was initially resistant to violence, Agent Martinez noted, but she eventually agreed that witness elimination might be necessary if legal strategies failed to neutralize your testimony. Thomas gripped the conference table with white knuckles, his surgeon's composure cracking under the weight of learning that his wife had been planning his murder. "How close did they come to acting on these plans?" Thomas asked. "Close enough that we've placed you both in protective custody, effective immediately," Agent Martinez replied. "Your homes are being monitored by federal agents, and we're implementing security protocols until the criminal network is completely dismantled." The transformation from crime victims to protected witnesses happened so quickly that I struggled to process the implications. Federal marshals would monitor our movements, our communications would be intercepted for security purposes, and our normal lives would be suspended indefinitely while international criminals were prosecuted. The international scope complicates prosecution timelines, Agent Martinez explained. We're coordinating with law enforcement agencies in multiple countries to arrest network associates simultaneously. This case could take years to fully resolve. "What happens to Marcus and Victoria during this extended timeline?" I asked. "They're being held in federal maximum security facilities without possibility of bail. However, their criminal associates remain active and dangerous. The witness elimination discussions were serious considerations, not idle threats." She provided us with federal protection protocols that would govern our lives for the foreseeable future. New identities, relocated residences, monitored communications, and restricted travel until the international criminal network was completely neutralized. The federal safe house became my prison and sanctuary simultaneously. Located in an undisclosed suburban neighborhood 40 minutes from my former life, the two-story colonial looked ordinary from the outside, but contained security systems that rivaled military installations. Motion sensors, bulletproof glass, panic rooms, and federal agents who rotated shifts every 8 hours. Thomas lived in a similar facility 6 miles away. Our locations kept separate for security reasons that Agent Martinez explained with clinical precision. If one safe house is compromised, the other witness remains protected. Standard protocol for high-value targets in international criminal cases. High-value targets. The phrase felt surreal when applied to suburban spouses who'd accidentally uncovered marriage fraud.
But the evidence recovered from Marcus and Victoria's criminal associates confirmed that we'd become priority elimination targets for organizations that viewed witness murder as routine business practice. The Swiss banking records reveal systematic theft dating back 15 years, Agent Martinez reported during our weekly security briefing. Your husband has been operating under multiple identities across 3 continents. The man you married doesn't actually exist in any legal sense. The identity revelation was more devastating than his financial crimes or murder planning. Marcus Blackwood wasn't just a criminal. He was an entirely fabricated persona created to facilitate long-term fraud operations. The 12 years of marriage I'd believed we'd shared had been performance art conducted by someone whose real name I'd never known. "Who is he actually?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. He's Heinrich Müller, born in East Germany, trained in financial manipulation by the Stasi before the Berlin Wall fell. He emigrated to the United States in 1994 using forged documents and has been operating various criminal enterprises ever since. The revelation that I'd been married to a former East German intelligence operative explained Marcus's sophisticated deception skills and systematic approach to emotional manipulation. He'd been trained by professional spies to exploit human psychology for state security purposes, then applied those skills to international fraud operations. Victoria's background is equally disturbing, Agent Martinez continued. Born Svetlana Petrov in St. Petersburg, she worked for Russian organized crime before establishing her current identity in 2008. Her interior design business has always been a front for money laundering operations.
Thomas received his wife's true identity with the same clinical focus he brought to complex surgical procedures, but I could see the emotional devastation in his eyes. We'd both been married to foreign criminals who'd viewed our relationships as long-term intelligence operations rather than genuine partnerships. The international arrest warrants have been issued, Agent Martinez announced. Law enforcement agencies in 12 countries are coordinating simultaneous raids on network facilities. The operation begins tomorrow morning. The prospect of worldwide arrests based on evidence Thomas and I had provided felt both empowering and terrifying. Our accidental discovery of boarding passes had triggered an international law enforcement operation that would dismantle criminal networks across multiple continents. What happens if some of the network associates escape arrest? Thomas asked, his medical training making him consider worst-case scenarios. Then you remain in protective custody until they're captured or eliminated, Agent Martinez replied with matter-of-fact directness. The threat assessment won't change until every network member is neutralized. The possibility of spending years in federal protection while international fugitives planned our elimination was becoming increasingly real. Our decision to pursue justice had transformed us into permanent refugees from our normal lives, dependent on government protection for basic survival. There's something else you need to know, Agent Martinez said, her tone shifting to something more personal. The financial recovery process has uncovered additional complications. Your stolen assets were used as collateral for loans that funded other criminal operations. Recovery will require unraveling complex international financial transactions. The news that our money had been used to fund additional crimes added another layer of violation to Heinrich and Svetlana's systematic betrayal. Not only had they stolen our assets, but they'd used those funds to finance operations that destroyed other innocent victims. How much can we realistically expect to recover? I asked, needing to understand the financial reality of rebuilding my life. Possibly 60 to 70%, assuming successful asset seizures in all participating countries, but the timeline could extend 5 years or longer. The prospect of spending half a decade in legal limbo while international courts resolved complex asset recovery cases felt overwhelming. Thomas and I had lost our marriages, our homes, our normal identities, and now faced years of uncertainty while bureaucratic processes slowly returned fragments of what had been stolen. That evening, in my secure facility surrounded by federal protection, I attempted to process the complete transformation of my existence. 4 days ago, I'd been a suburban wife, concerned about routine marital problems. Now I was a protected witness in an international criminal prosecution, married to a foreign spy, targeted for elimination by professional assassins. The man I'd called Marcus had been planning my murder while sleeping beside me, discussing vacation plans, and maintaining the performance of loving husband. Heinrich Müller had viewed me as a disposable asset, whose elimination would be determined by operational necessity rather than human consideration. Thomas called using the secure communication system federal agents monitored for our safety. "Do you think we'll ever have normal lives again?" he asked, his voice carrying exhaustion that matched my own emotional state. "I'm not sure normal exists anymore," I admitted. "Even if we survive the prosecution and recover our assets, how do you trust anyone again after this level of betrayal?" The international arrest operation began at dawn across 12 time zones. Agent Martinez coordinated from the federal building's Crisis Command Center, her team monitoring real-time law enforcement raids in Switzerland, Singapore, Monaco, the Cayman Islands, and 8 other countries where Heinrich and Svetlana's criminal network had established operations. Thomas and I watched the coordinated takedowns through secure video feeds, our safe house transformed into a command center with multiple screens displaying arrest operations happening thousands of miles away. Federal agents in Zurich stormed a private banking facility that had been laundering stolen assets for over a decade. Simultaneous raids in Singapore targeted currency exchange operations that specialized in cryptocurrency conversion for international criminals. Target acquisition confirmed in 7 locations, Agent Martinez reported through our secure communication system. Network financial coordinator arrested in Geneva. Document shredding operation interrupted in Monaco. Assassination team neutralized in Prague.
The mention of an assassination team made my hands shake as I realized how close Thomas and I had come to professional elimination. Heinrich and Svetlana's associates had been preparing to murder us while federal agents built their prosecution case. Our survival had depended on international law enforcement coordination that succeeded by margins measured in hours rather than days. 2 network associates remain unaccounted for, Agent Martinez continued. Dmitry Volkov and Anna Santos. Both are considered extremely dangerous and specifically tasked with witness elimination in compromised operations. The news that professional assassins remained free to pursue us created a level of fear I hadn't experienced since discovering Heinrich's true identity. Federal protection had provided security, but knowing that trained killers were actively hunting us made every sound outside our safe house seem potentially threatening. Thomas's voice through the secure communication system carried strain that matched my own anxiety. What's the timeline for locating these remaining targets? Interpol has issued red notices for both subjects, Agent Martinez replied. Their photographs and biometric data have been distributed to law enforcement agencies worldwide, but professionals of their caliber could remain hidden for months if they have established escape protocols. The prospect of spending months in federal protection while international assassins planned our elimination felt suffocating. Every day in secure facilities was another day stolen from whatever remained of our normal lives. But venturing outside federal protection could result in professional murder by people trained to eliminate witnesses efficiently. There's positive news regarding asset recovery, Agent Martinez announced, her tone brightening for the first time during our crisis briefing. The Swiss raids recovered documentation showing the location of major account holdings. We've frozen over $30 million in stolen assets, including funds taken from your personal accounts. The financial recovery was welcome news, but money seemed less important when professional killers were actively pursuing us. Heinrich and Svetlana had stolen our savings, but their criminal associates were threatening to steal our lives entirely. The arrested network members are being offered plea agreements in exchange for information about Volkov and Santos, Agent Martinez continued. Several have already indicated willingness to cooperate if they receive reduced sentences and protective custody. The possibility that other criminals might provide intelligence about our would-be assassins offered hope for resolution, but it also highlighted how many people had been involved in the network that had targeted us. Heinrich and Svetlana weren't lone operators.
They'd been part of a sophisticated international organization with resources that rivaled government intelligence services. What happens if Volkov and Santos are never captured? I asked, needing to understand the worst-case scenario for our long-term security. Federal protection becomes permanent, Agent Martinez replied with clinical directness. New identities, relocated residences, monitored communications indefinitely. Essentially, you would become permanent refugees from your former lives. The prospect of never returning to normal existence was devastating, but it was preferable to being murdered by professional assassins. Heinrich and Svetlana's criminal enterprise had created consequences that would extend far beyond their own prosecution and imprisonment. That afternoon, Thomas and I were allowed a supervised meeting at a neutral federal facility. Seeing him after days of separation was both comforting and heartbreaking. We'd both lost weight from stress, our faces showing the strain of living under constant security threats. I keep thinking about the vacation photos, Thomas said, as we sat in the sterile conference room under federal supervision. All those pictures of Victoria and me looking happy together. Every smile was performance art by a Russian criminal who was planning to steal everything I'd worked for. I understood his need to process the complete fabrication of relationships we'd believed were genuine. Heinrich used to tell me bedtime stories about his childhood in Ohio, detailed memories about Little League baseball and summer jobs at his uncle's hardware store. Pure fiction created by someone trained to manipulate human emotions. The federal supervisor, Agent Collins, listened to our conversation with professional sympathy. Operatives like Heinrich and Svetlana receive years of training in psychological manipulation. They study their targets with scientific precision, creating false personalities designed to exploit specific emotional vulnerabilities.
Agent Martinez's voice crackled through the communication system with an update that made us all freeze. Volkov was spotted in Montreal 6 hours ago. Canadian authorities are coordinating with FBI teams for potential arrest operation. Santos remains unlocated. The news that one assassin had been identified offered hope, but knowing that another remained free to pursue us maintained the constant anxiety that had dominated our lives since the international arrests began. That evening, as I prepared for another night in federal protection, I realized that Heinrich and Svetlana's betrayal had taught me something valuable about human nature. People were capable of extraordinary deception, but they were also capable of extraordinary resilience when survival required strategic thinking and decisive action. Heinrich Müller had underestimated his victim's capacity for evolution under pressure. His assumption that I would remain passive while he destroyed my life had become the foundation of an international prosecution that would ensure he spent his remaining years in federal prison. The breakthrough came at 3:17 a.m. when Dmitry Volkov made a critical mistake. Canadian authorities captured him attempting to cross into the United States using forged documents, his arrest triggering a cascade of intelligence that would reshape our understanding of Heinrich and Svetlana's criminal network. Agent Martinez called our secure facilities with updates that revealed the true scope of what Thomas and I had inadvertently exposed. Volkov's interrogation has provided intelligence about network operations spanning 23 countries. This isn't just financial fraud, it's a state-sponsored criminal enterprise with connections to foreign intelligence services. The revelation that Heinrich and Svetlana had been operating as part of government-sponsored criminal activities explained their sophisticated tradecraft and international resources. They hadn't been freelance criminals. They'd been foreign agents using marriage fraud to infiltrate American financial systems for espionage purposes. The network has been systematically targeting high-value American couples for over 15 years, Agent Martinez continued during our emergency briefing. Financial professionals, government contractors, defense industry executives, anyone with access to sensitive information or significant assets. Thomas and I had been selected not just for our wealth, but for our potential intelligence value. Heinrich had specifically targeted me because my graphic design clients included several defense contractors whose marketing materials provided insights into classified military projects. Svetlana had chosen Thomas because his position at Metropolitan General Hospital gave her access to medical research with potential military applications. Your marriages were long-term intelligence operations disguised as criminal fraud, Agent Martinez explained. Heinrich and Svetlana were collecting industrial secrets and government information while stealing financial assets.
The Dubai operation was their extraction protocol when their intelligence-gathering mission was compromised. The documents recovered from Volkov's arrest painted a picture of systematic espionage that had been happening under the nose of American intelligence services for over a decade. Heinrich and Svetlana weren't just thieves. They were foreign spies who'd used a marital intimacy to gather classified information that could threaten national security. The most disturbing discovery involves the scope of their intelligence collection, Agent Martinez said, producing classified documents that required security clearance to review. Heinrich accessed confidential financial information from dozens of defense contractors through your client relationships. Svetlana used Thomas's hospital credentials to gather research data on biological weapons countermeasures. The revelation that my freelance graphic design work had been exploited for foreign espionage made me feel complicit in crimes against national security. Heinrich had been using my professional relationships to gather intelligence, while I had believed I was supporting his legitimate financial advisory business. Ana Santos has been located in Caracas, Agent Martinez announced. Venezuelan authorities are coordinating extradition proceedings, but the timeline could extend several weeks. The important news is that both assassination targets have been neutralized. The capture of both professional killers who'd been tasked with our elimination created the first genuine relief I had experienced since discovering Heinrich's true identity. Thomas and I were no longer active targets for professional assassination, though our security status would remain elevated until all network associates were prosecuted.
What happens to us now? Thomas asked, his medical training making him focus on prognosis and recovery timelines. The espionage charges complicate your victim status, Agent Martinez explained. You're now key witnesses in a national security investigation that will require extensive testimony before congressional intelligence committees. Your protective custody will continue, but the scope has expanded to include counterintelligence protocols. The transformation from crime victims to national security witnesses felt surreal and overwhelming. Thomas and I had accidentally uncovered foreign espionage operations that threatened American interests across multiple industries and government sectors. The financial recovery process has been accelerated due to national security implications, Agent Martinez continued. Assets stolen for foreign intelligence purposes receive priority treatment under federal recovery statutes. You should see significant financial restoration within 6 months. The expedited asset recovery was welcome news, but it came with complications that would define our lives for years. Congressional testimony, security clearances, ongoing counterintelligence interviews, and permanent monitoring by federal agencies would replace the normal privacy and autonomy we'd lost when Heinrich and Svetlana infiltrated our marriages. There's something else you need to understand, Agent Martinez said, her tone shifting to something more serious. The intelligence Heinrich and Svetlana gathered from your relationships has been transmitted to foreign governments. You may remain targets for recruitment or elimination by other hostile intelligence services. The prospect of permanent targeting by foreign spy agencies was terrifying and exhausting. Heinrich and Svetlana's betrayal had exposed Thomas and me to international security threats that would require lifelong vigilance and federal protection. That evening, Thomas and I were allowed another supervised meeting at the federal facility. The conference room felt less sterile now that both assassination targets had been captured, but the weight of learning about the espionage implications created a different kind of anxiety. I keep thinking about all the medical research projects I discussed with Victoria, Thomas said, his voice carrying guilt that matched my own feelings about Heinrich's exploitation of my client relationships. Classified pharmaceutical development, biological countermeasure research, experimental treatments with military applications. She had access to everything. The scope of information Heinrich and Svetlana had gathered through our marriages was staggering and potentially damaging to American national security. They'd used intimate relationships to collect intelligence that could advantage foreign governments in medical research, defense technology, and financial strategy. Agent Martinez says they've briefed the CIA and NSA about potential intelligence compromises, I said, sharing updates from my own security briefings. Heinrich accessed client files for defense contractors working on classified weapons systems. The damage assessment could take months.
The federal agents supervising our meeting listened with professional concern as we processed the magnitude of espionage operations that had been conducted through our marriages. Heinrich and Svetlana hadn't just stolen our money and planned our murders. They'd used our relationships to gather intelligence that could threaten American military and economic interests. The counterintelligence officers want to conduct comprehensive debriefings about every conversation you had with Heinrich and Svetlana. Anything they discussed about your work, your clients, your professional relationships. The intelligence value of information gathered through spousal access is typically extremely high. The prospect of months of counterintelligence interviews felt exhausting, but it was necessary to assess the damage Heinrich and Svetlana had inflicted on American national security through their systematic exploitation of our trust. "At least we're alive to testify," Thomas said, demonstrating the practical perspective that had sustained us through the worst revelations about our marriages. "And we prevented them from escaping with state secrets," I added, finding some satisfaction in knowing that our accidental discovery had protected American interests from further compromise. The foreign intelligence operatives who'd infiltrated our lives were now facing prosecution for espionage, financial crimes, and conspiracy against the United States. Their sophisticated operation had been exposed by suburban spouses who'd refused to remain passive when confronted with betrayal.
The legal strategy required us to demonstrate that Heinrich and Svetlana had deliberately targeted us for our intelligence value, not just our financial assets. Our testimony would need to show systematic evidence gathering that went beyond simple theft. Heinrich specifically asked detailed questions about my defense contractor clients, I said, reviewing notes I'd compiled during weeks of counterintelligence debriefings. He wanted to know about their project timelines, security protocols, and personnel with classified access. At the time, I thought he was making conversation about my work. Thomas nodded with similar recognition. Svetlana consistently steered conversations toward my hospital's research programs. She asked about pharmaceutical trials, biological research protocols, and which doctors had military consulting contracts. I assumed she was showing interest in my career. Director Crawford smiled grimly. Professional intelligence operatives are trained to gather information through apparently casual conversation. Heinrich and Svetlana were conducting systematic intelligence collection while maintaining the facade of supportive spouses interested in your professional lives. The psychological manipulation had been comprehensive and sophisticated. Heinrich and Svetlana had exploited our desire to share our work with people we loved, turning intimate conversations into intelligence briefings that compromised American national security. Your testimony will reveal their systematic approach to intelligence gathering, Agent Martinez explained. The patterns you describe will demonstrate espionage intent rather than incidental information access during financial fraud. That afternoon, we participated in mock testimony sessions designed to prepare us for aggressive cross-examination by defense attorneys. Federal prosecutors warned us that Heinrich and Svetlana's legal team would attempt to portray us as bitter spouses seeking revenge through false espionage accusations. They'll argue that you're exaggerating the scope of their intelligence gathering to ensure longer prison sentences, warned Assistant U.S. Attorney Sarah Chen. Your credibility will be crucial for establishing espionage charges that could result in life imprisonment. The stakes were enormous. If our testimony successfully established espionage charges, Heinrich and Svetlana would face life sentences that would ensure they never threatened American security again. If the defense successfully portrayed their actions as simple financial fraud, they could receive much shorter sentences that would allow them to resume intelligence operations after release. The key is demonstrating systematic intelligence collection that went beyond normal spousal conversation, Attorney Chen explained. Heinrich and Svetlana's questions about classified information, their requests for specific technical details, their interest in personnel with security clearances, these patterns establish espionage intent. Thomas and I spent hours reviewing transcripts of conversations we'd had with Heinrich and Svetlana, identifying instances where they'd systematically gathered intelligence while maintaining the appearance of casual interest. The documentation revealed tradecraft that was clearly professional rather than incidental. Heinrich requested copies of marketing materials I'd created for defense contractors, I noted. He claimed he was impressed with my design work and wanted to study my portfolio, but he specifically asked for materials related to classified projects. Svetlana photographed medical research documents she claimed she found interesting, Thomas added. She said she wanted to understand my work better, but she specifically targeted information about military medical applications. The pattern of systematic intelligence gathering was clear and compelling. Heinrich and Svetlana had used their marriages to collect classified information that could advantage foreign governments in military technology, medical research, and defense strategy. Director Crawford reviewed our testimony preparation with satisfaction. Your evidence will establish the most comprehensive espionage prosecution in this district's history. Heinrich and Svetlana's conviction will send a clear message to foreign intelligence services about the consequences of targeting American couples for infiltration operations. As we prepared to leave the federal courthouse, Agent Martinez provided updates on the broader investigation. The international cooperation has been exceptional. Law enforcement agencies in 15 countries have provided evidence and testimony that will support the espionage charges. The global scope of Heinrich and Svetlana's prosecution felt appropriate for crimes that had threatened American national security through systematic intelligence gathering. Their marriage-based infiltration operation had been dismantled by the suburban spouses they'd underestimated.
Heinrich Müller and Svetlana Petrov had underestimated their target's capacity for strategic thinking and decisive action. Their assumption that Thomas and I would remain naive victims had become the foundation of a counterintelligence operation that would dismantle an international spy network. But as we prepared to leave the federal facility under continued security protection, I realized that learning the full scope of their betrayal was both liberating and terrifying. We'd survived assassination attempts and exposed foreign espionage, but the consequences would follow us for the rest of our lives. The suburban wife who'd answered a wrong phone call had accidentally become a key witness in protecting American national security. Sometimes justice required accepting that normal life might never be possible again. 3 weeks after the international arrests, Thomas and I found ourselves in the most secure wing of the federal courthouse, preparing for testimony that would determine the prosecution's strategy against Heinrich, Svetlana, and their remaining network associates. The counterintelligence briefings had revealed the full scope of damage assessment, and the numbers were staggering. 47 defense contractors compromised, Agent Martinez reported during our pre-testimony meeting. Heinrich accessed classified information on next-generation weapons systems, stealth technology, and cybersecurity protocols through your client relationships. The intelligence value to foreign governments is estimated in the billions. The revelation that my freelance graphic design work had provided Heinrich with access to state secrets felt like carrying responsibility for national security breaches. Every marketing brochure I'd created for defense clients had potentially exposed American military advantages to hostile foreign powers. Svetlana's medical intelligence gathering was equally comprehensive, Agent Martinez continued. She used Thomas's hospital credentials to access research on biological weapons countermeasures, pharmaceutical development for military applications, and experimental treatments that could advantage foreign military medical programs. Thomas absorbed this information with the clinical detachment he used during complex surgical procedures, but I could see the weight of responsibility in his eyes. We'd both been unknowing accomplices in espionage operations that had compromised American strategic interests across multiple critical sectors. The prosecutors need your testimony to establish how Heinrich and Svetlana gained access to classified information, Agent Martinez explained. Your personal relationships with them are the foundation of the espionage charges. Without your testimony, they can only be prosecuted for financial crimes. The pressure to testify effectively felt enormous. Heinrich and Svetlana's prosecution for espionage, rather than simple fraud, would send a message to other foreign intelligence services about the consequences of using marriage relationships to infiltrate American security systems. Director James Crawford from the FBI's Counterintelligence Division joined our briefing, his presence indicating the national security importance of our case. At 58, he carried the authority of someone who'd spent decades protecting American interests from foreign intelligence threats. Your accidental discovery has provided us with our first comprehensive view of this type of long-term infiltration operation, Director Crawford explained. Foreign intelligence services have been using romantic relationships to gather American secrets for decades, but we've never had inside access to their methods and objectives. The briefing materials he shared painted a picture of systematic vulnerability in American security. Hundreds of foreign operatives were likely operating similar marriage-based intelligence schemes, targeting American professionals with access to sensitive information or valuable assets. Heinrich and Svetlana's prosecution will establish legal precedent for treating marriage fraud as espionage when it's used to gather classified information, Director Crawford continued. Your testimony could protect thousands of Americans from similar targeting by foreign intelligence services. The weight of national security implications was both empowering and overwhelming. Thomas and I had evolved from crime victims to key witnesses in establishing legal frameworks that would protect American interests from future foreign intelligence infiltration. The defense will argue that Heinrich and Svetlana were motivated by financial gain rather than espionage objectives, Agent Martinez warned. They'll claim the classified information access was incidental to their criminal fraud rather than the primary mission. That evening, in our continued federal protection, Thomas and I reflected on the transformation that had defined the past month. We'd evolved from naive crime victims to key witnesses in protecting American national security interests. Do you think we'll ever feel safe in normal relationships again? Thomas asked, voicing the question that had haunted both of us since learning the true scope of Heinrich and Svetlana's deception. Maybe safety isn't about trusting completely, I replied. Maybe it's about being smart enough to recognize when trust is being exploited. The foreign intelligence operatives who'd infiltrated our lives had taught us that sophisticated deception was possible, but they'd also demonstrated that careful observation and strategic thinking could expose even professional spies when they became overconfident. Heinrich Müller and Svetlana Petrov had spent years gathering American secrets through systematic exploitation of marital intimacy. Their prosecution would establish legal precedent protecting thousands of Americans from similar foreign intelligence targeting. But more importantly, their conviction would prove that American citizens were capable of fighting back effectively when their trust was betrayed and their national security was threatened. Sometimes, the best defense against professional spies was simply refusing to remain passive when something felt wrong. The suburban wife who'd answered a wrong phone call had accidentally become a guardian of American national security. The responsibility felt enormous, but so did the satisfaction of ensuring that Heinrich and Svetlana would spend their remaining years in federal prison rather than gathering secrets for hostile foreign powers. The trial began on a gray November morning, exactly 6 weeks after I'd found those Dubai boarding passes that had started this entire nightmare. The federal courthouse buzzed with media attention as reporters covered what they dubbed the marriage spy ring case. Thomas and I entered through a secure entrance, surrounded by federal marshals who'd become our constant companions. Heinrich sat at the defendant's table wearing an orange jumpsuit that stripped away the sophisticated facade he'd maintained throughout our marriage. Without his expensive suits and carefully groomed appearance, he looked smaller and more ordinary than the commanding presence who'd shared my bed for 12 years. The transformation was both satisfying and disturbing. Svetlana occupied the adjacent chair, her platinum hair pulled back severely and her elegant composure replaced by the kind of institutional anonymity that federal detention imposed on all inmates. The woman who'd manipulated Thomas with refined sophistication now appeared as just another criminal defendant facing life imprisonment. The prosecution calls Rachel Blackwood to the stand, announced Assistant U.S. Attorney Chen, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd built her career prosecuting national security cases. Walking to the witness stand felt like crossing a bridge between my former life and whatever future awaited beyond this trial. The courtroom was packed with federal agents, congressional staffers, and intelligence community observers who would use our testimony to assess ongoing threats to American security. Mrs. Blackwood, please describe the defendant's interest in your professional relationships with defense contractors. Attorney Chen began, establishing the foundation for espionage charges that would determine Heinrich's sentence. I testified about Heinrich's systematic questions regarding my graphic design clients, his requests for marketing materials related to classified projects, and his apparent fascination with defense industry timelines and personnel. The pattern of intelligence gathering became clear as I described conversations that had seemed like spousal interest but were actually professional espionage activities. Did the defendant ever request specific technical information about your client's classified projects? Attorney Chen asked. Frequently, I replied, consulting notes I'd compiled during weeks of counterintelligence debriefings. He asked about weapons system development schedules, cybersecurity protocol implementations, and which employees had access to classified information. At the time, I thought he was showing interest in my work. Heinrich's defense attorney, Jonathan Reeves, approached cross-examination with the aggressive strategy we'd been warned to expect. Mrs. Blackwood, isn't it true that you're exaggerating my client's casual questions about your work because you're angry about his affair with Mrs. Sinclair?
The question was designed to portray my testimony as emotional revenge rather than factual evidence, but weeks of preparation had equipped me to respond with clinical precision. Mr. Reeves, your client's questions about classified information went far beyond normal spousal conversation. He specifically requested copies of marketing materials for defense projects, asked detailed questions about security clearances, and showed particular interest in employees with access to sensitive information. But you have no evidence that my client transmitted this information to foreign governments, Reeves countered, attempting to undermine the espionage charges. That's correct, I admitted. But the systematic nature of his intelligence gathering, combined with his false identity as Heinrich Müller rather than his actual name Marcus Blackwood, suggests professional espionage training rather than casual curiosity. The revelation of Heinrich's true identity had been a prosecutorial masterstroke. Attorney Chen had waited until cross-examination to establish that the man I'd married didn't legally exist, that Heinrich Müller was a cover identity created by foreign intelligence services. Thomas's testimony followed a similar pattern, documenting Svetlana's systematic intelligence gathering about medical research with military applications, her requests for access to classified pharmaceutical development, and her photography of documents related to biological weapons countermeasures. Mrs. Sinclair consistently steered conversations toward my hospital's research programs, Thomas testified with the clinical precision he brought to complex surgical procedures. She asked about pharmaceutical trials with military applications, biological research protocols, and which doctors had consulting contracts with defense agencies. The defense attempted to portray Svetlana's questions as normal spousal interest in Thomas's medical career, but the systematic nature of her intelligence gathering was clearly documented through hospital security recordings and research access logs that showed unusual patterns coinciding with her inquiries. The pattern of intelligence collection by both defendants demonstrates professional espionage training, testified Dr. Elizabeth Morgan, the FBI's leading expert on foreign intelligence operations. Their systematic approach to gathering classified information through marital relationships follows established tradecraft used by hostile intelligence services. The expert testimony established that Heinrich and Svetlana's intelligence gathering had followed professional protocols rather than casual curiosity, supporting espionage charges that carried life sentences rather than the shorter terms associated with financial fraud. Director Crawford testified about the national security implications of Heinrich and Svetlana's intelligence collection, describing how the classified information they'd gathered could advantage foreign governments in military technology, medical research, and defense strategy. The defendants systematically collected intelligence on next-generation weapon systems, stealth technology, cybersecurity protocols, biological weapons countermeasures, and pharmaceutical development with military applications, Director Crawford explained.
The intelligence value to hostile foreign powers is estimated in the billions of dollars. The prosecution's final witness was Pavel Kozlov, a former Russian intelligence officer who'd agreed to testify about foreign espionage operations in exchange for asylum and reduced sentences on unrelated charges. Marriage-based infiltration is a preferred method for long-term intelligence collection, Kozlov testified through a translator. Operatives are trained to establish intimate relationships with Americans who have access to classified information or valuable assets. The defendant's systematic approach follows established protocols used by multiple foreign intelligence services. Kozlov's testimony provided insider perspective on how foreign governments used romantic relationships to penetrate American security systems, validating the espionage charges against Heinrich and Svetlana. The defense attempted to portray Heinrich and Svetlana as freelance criminals motivated by financial gain, rather than state-sponsored operatives conducting systematic espionage. But the evidence of professional tradecraft and systematic intelligence gathering was overwhelming. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Attorney Chen said during closing arguments, the defendants used marriage relationships to systematically collect American classified information for transmission to hostile foreign powers. This isn't simple fraud motivated by greed. This is espionage that threatens our national security and the safety of American military personnel and intelligence operatives worldwide.
The jury deliberated for 3 days before returning guilty verdicts on all espionage charges. Heinrich received life imprisonment without possibility of parole. Svetlana received life imprisonment with possibility of parole after 30 years. As federal marshals led Heinrich away in shackles, he looked directly at me for the first time during the trial. His expression held something that might have been genuine remorse, but it was too late for apologies or explanations. The man who'd shared my bed while gathering American secrets would spend his remaining years in federal maximum security. Thomas and I left the courthouse surrounded by media attention and federal protection that would continue indefinitely. The trial had established legal precedent for prosecuting marriage-based espionage, but it had also made us permanent targets for retaliation by foreign intelligence services. "It's over," Thomas said as we were escorted to secure vehicles. "No," I replied, watching Heinrich disappear into federal custody. "It's just beginning." The foreign intelligence operatives who'd infiltrated our lives were now facing life imprisonment, but their prosecution had exposed us to international security threats that would require permanent vigilance. Sometimes justice came with consequences that lasted longer than the crimes that created them. But as we drove away from the courthouse under federal protection, I felt something I hadn't experienced since finding those Dubai boarding passes: genuine satisfaction. Heinrich Müller and Svetlana had spent years gathering American secrets through systematic exploitation of marital intimacy. Their conviction proved that American citizens were capable of fighting back effectively when their trust was betrayed and their national security was threatened. The suburban wife who'd answered a wrong phone call had accidentally become a guardian of American interests against foreign espionage. Sometimes the best revenge was ensuring that professional spies spent their remaining years in federal prison rather than gathering secrets that could harm innocent people. Heinrich and Svetlana had underestimated their victims' capacity for strategic thinking and decisive action. Their assumption that Thomas and I would remain passive while they destroyed our lives and compromised American security had become the foundation of their life sentences. 2 months after Heinrich and Svetlana's conviction, Agent Martinez delivered news that would fundamentally change our security status. The counterintelligence investigation had uncovered evidence that their espionage network included active cells in 12 other American cities, all using marriage-based infiltration to gather classified information. "The scope extends far beyond what we initially understood," she explained during our briefing at the federal safe house. Heinrich and Svetlana were part of a coordinated operation involving over 40 foreign operatives who've been conducting systematic intelligence collection through romantic relationships with American targets. The revelation that dozens of other Americans were unknowingly married to foreign spies created a national security crisis that required immediate federal intervention. Our accidental discovery had exposed an infiltration campaign that threatened multiple government agencies, defense contractors, and research institutions. Congressional intelligence committees have classified your case as a matter of critical national importance, Agent Martinez continued. Your testimony will be required for prosecuting the broader network and establishing new security protocols to prevent future infiltration operations. Thomas and I had evolved from crime victims to key witnesses in dismantling an international espionage campaign. The boarding passes I'd found in Heinrich's jacket had triggered investigations that would reshape American counterintelligence for decades. The asset recovery process has been completed ahead of schedule, Agent Martinez announced with something approaching satisfaction. Your stolen funds, plus damages and federal compensation for National Security Service, total approximately $4 million each. The financial compensation was substantial, but it came with conditions that would define our future. Federal witness protection, ongoing security monitoring, and periodic testimony requirements would replace the normal privacy we'd lost when Heinrich and Svetlana infiltrated our marriages. What happens next? I asked, needing to understand the timeline for whatever remained of our normal lives. Permanent relocation under new identities, Agent Martinez replied. The foreign intelligence services whose operations you've exposed will consider you priority targets indefinitely. Federal protection is permanent.
The prospect of spending our remaining years under assumed names in undisclosed locations felt both liberating and imprisoning. We'd survived comprehensive betrayal and helped protect American national security, but the cost was permanent exile from the lives we'd built before Heinrich and Svetlana's infiltration. That evening, Thomas and I shared our final meal in federal protection before being relocated to separate secure communities across the country. Our friendship had been forged through shared betrayal and mutual survival, but ongoing security required geographic separation. "Do you think we made the right choice?" Thomas asked, echoing the question that had haunted us since deciding to pursue justice rather than accepting victimhood. "They were planning to murder us anyway," I replied, the same answer I'd given weeks earlier. "At least this way, we fought back effectively." The foreign intelligence operatives who'd destroyed our marriages and threatened our lives were now serving life sentences in federal maximum security. Their espionage network had been dismantled, their stolen secrets had been recovered, and their infiltration methods had been exposed to prevent future operations. Heinrich Mueller and Svetlana Petrov had spent years gathering American classified information through systematic exploitation of marital intimacy. Their prosecution had established legal precedent that would protect thousands of Americans from similar targeting by hostile foreign powers. But more importantly, their conviction proved that sophisticated deception could be overcome by careful observation, strategic thinking, and decisive action when survival required fighting back against professional predators. The suburban wife who'd answered a wrong phone call had accidentally become a guardian of American national security. The responsibility had required permanent transformation, but it had also provided the satisfaction of ensuring that dangerous criminals faced consequences that matched their crimes. As federal agents prepared our final relocation, I realized that Heinrich's greatest mistake had been underestimating his victim's capacity for evolution under pressure. His assumption that I would remain passive while he destroyed my life had become the foundation of an international prosecution that dismantled a foreign espionage network. Sometimes justice required becoming someone you'd never intended to be, but sometimes that transformation was exactly what survival demanded. 5 years later, I was living under the name Sarah Mitchell in a quiet Colorado mountain town when the phone call came that would bring my story full circle. Agent Martinez, now retired from the FBI, contacted me through secure channels with news that would forever close the chapter Heinrich had opened in my life. "Heinrich Mueller died in federal prison last night," she said, her voice carrying the weight of information that had taken years to reach me. "Apparent suicide, though the investigation is ongoing. There's something else you need to know." The news of Heinrich's death created complex emotions I hadn't anticipated. Relief that my primary threat was permanently eliminated, but also a strange sadness for the complete waste of a life that could have been lived honestly instead of through systematic deception.
Before his death, Heinrich provided a full confession to federal investigators, Agent Martinez continued. He detailed the complete scope of the espionage network, identified operatives who remain active, and revealed information that will protect hundreds of Americans from future targeting. The irony was profound. Heinrich's final act had been to protect the country he'd spent years betraying, perhaps seeking some form of redemption for the comprehensive damage he'd inflicted on innocent people. His confession included a personal message for you, Agent Martinez said carefully. He wanted you to know that his feelings for you had become genuine over time, that loving you had made him question his mission, and that discovering you'd exposed his operation had been the first time he'd felt proud of someone he'd deceived. The revelation that Heinrich had developed authentic emotions during our fabricated marriage was both heartbreaking and infuriating. If he genuinely loved me, his willingness to destroy my life and plan my murder became even more incomprehensible. Svetlana is also providing cooperation from federal prison, Agent Martinez added. She's helping identify network operatives in exchange for transfer to minimum security. Thomas sends his regards, by the way. He's rebuilding his medical practice under federal protection in Oregon. Learning that Thomas was successfully reconstructing his life provided comfort during a conversation that had reopened emotional wounds I'd thought were fully healed. We'd both survived comprehensive betrayal and emerged stronger, though permanently changed.
The most important news is that your federal protection status is being downgraded, Agent Martinez announced. With Heinrich dead and the network dismantled, you're no longer considered a high-priority target. You can resume using your real name if you choose. The opportunity to reclaim my identity felt like emerging from a 5-year witness protection cocoon. Rachel Blackwood could exist again, though she would be someone entirely different from the naive suburban wife who'd answered that fateful phone call. There's a final detail, Agent Martinez said. Heinrich's confession revealed that he'd been ordered to eliminate you 3 days after you found the Dubai boarding passes. Your decision to contact federal authorities literally saved your life by hours. The revelation that Heinrich had been preparing to murder me within days of my discovery confirmed that every choice Thomas and I had made during our crisis had been correct. Passive acceptance of betrayal would have resulted in our deaths while Heinrich and Svetlana escaped to continue their espionage operations. That evening, I sat in my Colorado cabin, surrounded by the peaceful life I'd built through federal relocation, processing the news that the man who'd systematically destroyed my trust was finally gone. Heinrich Mueller's death had closed a chapter, but it couldn't restore the innocence he'd stolen or erase the transformation his betrayal had required. I thought about the suburban wife who'd been making breakfast when she'd answered that fateful phone call. She'd been naive but genuine, trusting but capable of love, vulnerable but ultimately stronger than the foreign intelligence operative who'd underestimated her capacity for strategic thinking and decisive action. Heinrich had spent 12 years gathering American secrets through systematic exploitation of marital intimacy. His death in federal prison was justice for crimes that had threatened national security and destroyed innocent lives. But more importantly, his failed operation had proven that sophisticated deception could be overcome by careful observation, strategic thinking, and decisive action when survival required fighting back against professional predators. The foreign intelligence operative who'd infiltrated my life had finally paid the ultimate price for underestimating his victim's capacity for evolution under pressure. His assumption that I would remain passive while he destroyed my life had become the foundation of his life sentence and eventual death in federal custody. Sometimes the best revenge was simply outliving the people who'd tried to destroy you. Heinrich Mueller was dead. Svetlana Petrov was serving life imprisonment, and their espionage network had been dismantled. I was alive, safe, and free to reclaim my identity. The suburban wife who'd answered a wrong phone call had accidentally become a guardian of American national security, and she'd survived to tell the story. Returning to my real name felt like stepping back into clothes that no longer fit properly. Rachel Blackwood existed on paper again, but the woman who claimed that identity bore little resemblance to the trusting suburban wife who'd made breakfast for a foreign spy every morning for 12 years. I moved back to a city near my original home, not Westfield itself, but close enough to reclaim fragments of my former life.
The federal compensation had provided financial security that allowed me to purchase a modest house and restart my graphic design business, though I now specialized in security consulting rather than defense contractor marketing materials. The irony wasn't lost on me that Heinrich's betrayal had taught me enough about operational security to build a successful business helping other companies protect themselves from corporate espionage. My experience as an unwitting intelligence target had become my professional qualification for preventing similar infiltrations. Thomas and I maintained contact through secure communication channels, our friendship sustained by shared survival of comprehensive betrayal. He'd rebuilt his medical practice in Portland, specializing in trauma surgery with a new understanding of how emotional wounds could be just as devastating as physical injuries. I got married again, Thomas told me during one of our quarterly check-ins. Her name is Jennifer. She's a nurse who understands why I need complete transparency about everything. No secrets, no separate bank accounts, no unexplained travel. His successful reconstruction of intimate trust after Svetlana's systematic deception provided hope that normal relationships might still be possible for survivors of marriage-based espionage, but it also highlighted how much work was required to rebuild the capacity for vulnerability after professional predators had exploited it so comprehensively. "What about you?" Thomas asked. "Any romantic prospects?"
The question always made me uncomfortable because the answer revealed how completely Heinrich's betrayal had changed my approach to human connection. I'd had relationships over the past 5 years, but none had progressed beyond careful friendship. The idea of sharing a home, combining finances, or trusting someone with access to my professional life felt impossible. "I'm working on it," I replied, the same answer I'd given for years. "Heinrich's dead," Thomas said gently. "Svetlana's in prison. The network is dismantled. You're safe to trust again." The logical assessment was accurate, but emotional healing operated on different timelines than federal prosecutions. Heinrich's death had eliminated external threats, but it couldn't restore the innocence that had made comprehensive deception possible. The most unexpected consequence of my survival was receiving letters from other Americans who discovered they were married to foreign intelligence operatives. The congressional testimony had been declassified, and my name had become associated with marriage-based espionage cases across the country. "Your courage to fight back saved my life," wrote Maria Santos from Phoenix. "I found your testimony online after discovering my husband was using our relationship to gather information about my work at the defense contractor. Reading about your experience gave me the strength to contact federal authorities instead of confronting him directly." The letters arrived regularly, always with similar themes: accidental discovery, systematic betrayal, and the decision to seek justice rather than accept victimhood. My experience had apparently become a template for other Americans whose marriages had been infiltrated by foreign intelligence services. Some letters came from federal agents working similar cases. "Your prosecution established legal precedent that we use regularly," wrote Agent David Chen from the Los Angeles field office. "The marriage fraud statute you helped create has resulted in 17 convictions of foreign operatives who were using romantic relationships to gather classified information." The knowledge that Heinrich and Svetlana's prosecution had protected other Americans from similar targeting provided satisfaction that helped balance the personal cost of pursuing justice. Our accidental discovery had prevented hundreds of families from suffering the systematic betrayal that had destroyed our marriages. But the most meaningful letter came from Director Crawford, now retired from FBI counterintelligence. "Your willingness to testify against trained intelligence operatives required courage that most Americans will never understand," he wrote. "The foreign espionage network you exposed had been operating for over a decade. Without your evidence, they would have continued destroying American lives and stealing classified information indefinitely."
The validation from someone who'd spent decades protecting American interests helped justify the permanent transformation Heinrich's betrayal had required. The suburban wife who'd answered that wrong phone call had accidentally become exactly what her country needed: a citizen willing to fight back against foreign threats regardless of personal cost. That evening, in my new home, surrounded by security systems I now understood were necessary, I reflected on the 5-year journey from victim to survivor to guardian of American interests. Heinrich Müller was dead, his espionage network was dismantled, and other Americans were safer because of our decision to pursue justice. The woman who'd been making coffee when she discovered those Dubai boarding passes had been naive but ultimately stronger than the foreign intelligence operative who'd systematically underestimated her capacity for strategic thinking and decisive action. Sometimes justice required years to achieve, but it was worth waiting for when the alternative was allowing professional predators to continue destroying innocent lives. Heinrich had spent 12 years gathering American secrets through exploitation of marital intimacy. His death in federal prison was proof that even sophisticated foreign intelligence operatives could be held accountable when their victims refused to remain passive in the face of comprehensive betrayal. The suburban wife who'd answered that wrong phone call had survived to protect other Americans from the marriage-based espionage that had nearly destroyed her own life. Sometimes the best revenge was simply living long enough to ensure that dangerous criminals faced consequences that matched their crimes. 10 years after finding those Dubai boarding passes, I received an invitation that would bring the final closure to Heinrich's chapter in my life. The FBI was hosting a ceremony honoring civilians who'd made extraordinary contributions to national security, and my name was among those being recognized for dismantling foreign espionage operations.
The ceremony took place in Washington, D.C., the same city where I'd first testified before congressional intelligence committees about Heinrich and Svetlana's systematic betrayal. Standing in the federal building where my transformation from victim to guardian had been formalized felt like completing a circle I'd never intended to draw. Director Sarah Martinez, now heading the FBI's Counterintelligence Division, presented awards to 12 Americans whose accidental discoveries had exposed foreign intelligence operations. Your willingness to fight back against trained operatives required courage that protected countless innocent families, she said, echoing the themes that had sustained me through years of reconstruction. Thomas attended the ceremony with his wife Jennifer and their 2 young children. Seeing him surrounded by the family he'd built after Svetlana's systematic destruction of his first marriage provided evidence that comprehensive healing was possible, even after the most devastating betrayals. "Any regrets?" he asked during the reception, the same question that had defined our survival journey. "About exposing them? Never," I replied, watching other honorees share similar stories of accidental discovery and strategic resistance. About trusting Heinrich in the first place? That's more complicated. The psychological aftermath had been the most challenging aspect of rebuilding my life. Heinrich's professional manipulation had taught me that sophisticated deception was possible, but it had also demonstrated that careful observation and strategic thinking could expose even trained intelligence operatives when they became overconfident. The woman I'd become was more cautious, but also more resilient than the suburban wife who'd answered that wrong phone call. I'd learned to trust gradually rather than completely, to verify rather than assume, to maintain emotional independence even within intimate relationships. "I finally understand what you meant about transformation," Thomas said, his children playing nearby while Jennifer chatted with other ceremony attendees. "We became the people we needed to be to survive what they did to us." The insight was accurate and liberating. Heinrich and Svetlana's betrayal had required evolution that was painful but ultimately strengthening. The naive trust that had made their deception possible had been replaced by informed caution that protected against future exploitation. That evening, alone in my hotel room overlooking the city where American intelligence operations were coordinated, I reflected on the decade-long journey from victim to survivor to protector. Heinrich Müller was dead, Svetlana Petrov remained in federal prison, and their espionage network had been permanently dismantled. More importantly, the legal precedent established by their prosecution had protected hundreds of other Americans from marriage-based intelligence infiltration. The suburban wife who'd accidentally discovered foreign spies had become exactly what her country needed: a citizen willing to sacrifice personal comfort to ensure that dangerous criminals face appropriate consequences. The boarding passes I'd found in Heinrich's jacket had triggered an international investigation that reshaped American counterintelligence protocols and established legal frameworks for prosecuting marriage-based espionage. My accidental discovery had prevented unknown numbers of future victims from suffering similar systematic betrayal. But the most satisfying outcome was personal. I'd survived comprehensive deception by someone trained to exploit human psychology for foreign intelligence purposes. Heinrich's assumption that I would remain passive while he destroyed my life had become the foundation of his life sentence and eventual death in federal custody. The foreign intelligence operative who'd infiltrated my marriage had finally paid the ultimate price for underestimating his victim's capacity for strategic thinking and decisive action. His professional training in psychological manipulation had been defeated by suburban common sense and the willingness to seek help when something felt fundamentally wrong. 10 years later, I was still alive, still fighting, and still protecting other Americans from the kind of systematic betrayal that had nearly destroyed my life. Heinrich Müller had been dead for 5 years, but the woman who'd exposed his crimes continued to thrive. Sometimes, the best revenge was simply outliving the people who'd tried to destroy you and using that survival to prevent others from suffering similar devastation. The suburban wife who'd answered a wrong phone call had accidentally become a guardian of American national security. She'd survived to tell the story, and more importantly, she'd survived to ensure that other Americans would never have to live through the same nightmare. That was justice worth waiting a decade to achieve.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.